Will, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm really good. Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Good stuff. Thanks for joining me. Well, for people who don't know who you are, could you give us a bit of an introduction, please?
Sure. I'm Will Beaumont. I have been in the tech space for, I guess, 25 years now professionally, doing everything from engineering to engineering leadership, and many of the things that I probably shouldn't be doing, like marketing and product and things like that, along the way. I've worked in like lots of different types of organizations, uh, from startups to kind of multinational corporation type stuff. Yeah, so I'm based in the UK, but was born in California, so I'm sort of bicontinental, I guess.
Nice, nice. Will, if you could take us back to the start of your career, could you talk us through the journey so far?
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. I studied computer science and AI, although the AI then was quite different from how it is now, I guess. The principles are the same, but I don't know that much of what I learned there still applies. Um, and I out of uni, I joined a consulting firm doing mostly public sector consulting. Um, and we worked on all kinds of stuff, but a lot of educational type stuff, doing exam results processing and stuff like that. And then we also launched a product business, um, which I led. And sort of over the course of, I guess I was there for 7 years, I want to say. And over that course, I kind of progressed from being a graduate engineer to ultimately being technical director at the business. Um, it was quite a small business, so I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but I think we were like 30 engineers at one point. But that was kind of the peak. And then from there, I left and I went to join TomTom, the sat nav company, and worked there as just a pure engineer for, I guess, 3 years, doing all kinds of stuff, on-device stuff. I did a bunch of map processing, reverse engineering stuff, really interesting technical problems. And then I got the opportunity to join a company called Scott Logic, who are, or at the time, they were a pure financial software consulting firm. So they worked with, I think, I want to say like 7 of the 10 largest investment banks doing various software projects. But I actually joined them to run their product division. They had been working on a product that they wanted to get out the door and they couldn't quite figure out how to do it. They never quite got it over the line. And so I came on board to help them with that. And then we spun out another product venture from there. And I did that for about 5 years. Um, and then I needed a break. And so I still did consulting on the side, doing health tech stuff. Um, but I moved to the States and became an actor for 6 years, I want to say, 5 years, and an
Nice.
acting teacher, um, which it was a great experience. And it actually, well, I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, but it gave me a bunch of skills that I didn't know I needed, um, that have really helped. And as I've come back to tech and leadership and things like that. Um, and then the pandemic hit, and the entertainment industry shut down like everything else. And I got back into tech, having recharged my batteries, and I joined Exodus, which the multi-chain self-custody wallet in the blockchain space.
Mhm.
And I worked there for a while, and then from there I joined sort of a series of startups, in social media, and then most recently I was the CTO at a company called Payman, which, sort of lives at the intersection of AI and payments fintech space. Um, yeah, and so that's what I did, and now I'm back to taking a break, uh,
Sounds
just
cool.
between things right now. Yeah.
No, that sounds cool. It sounds super, super varied. Really, tons of different
Yeah.
industries, like working, yeah, all over the place, I guess, when it comes to industries. And
Yeah.
then yeah, taking the break to do some acting as well. I've definitely got some questions
Yes,
about that for sure. Um,
for sure. Yeah.
were there any challenges throughout that journey that really surprised you that you weren't expecting?
I don't know if I don't know if I wasn't expecting the challenges, but there were definitely things that I didn't know were going to be a thing. For example, I sort of in my, I guess, naive younger self didn't realize that corporate politics were a thing, right?
Okay,
That I would have to navigate people having self-interests. It sort of seemed obvious to me that we should all be rooting for, whatever's best for the company, best idea wins type stuff. Um, and it came as, I mean, in retrospect, stupidly, but it came as a surprise that not everybody feels that way. Um, and so that was a learning curve to have to like develop those skills of, managing upwards and managing politics and fostering relationships and so on, that in order to overcome those things rather than just to build the best thing possible.
definitely.
So that was definitely one.
Just on that, if I can just
Yeah,
interject,
sure.
there, did you find that that was different when you were working in the AI startup world, in the blockchain world, or in the more corporate side of things that you might have done? Like, did you notice any difference?
Um, I noticed difference in the in the types of personal self-interests, but not really in their presence or not presence. I generally find in startups it's easier to navigate those things just because there's a smaller network, right? There's fewer people. Um, but
Yeah.
um, no, I mean, having worked certainly in at TomTom when I was there, I can't remember what the number of people was, but it was in the thousands. And there, that idea of being a small cog in a big machine definitely was difficult in some senses because just trying to affect any change becomes quite challenging. Um, a systemic change, not localized change. But whereas, for example, at Exodus, there was a, there was an equal amount of that kind of um, I don't know whether to call it empire building or but I think maybe because of the way the blockchain industry is, having come from sort of an anarchic counterculture place, um, there was a lot of strongly held opinions, and they weren't always totally aligned. And so, rather than it being purely political, it was sort of an identity thing as much as anything. It was just that certain people believed it should be this way, and certain other people believed it should be that way, and neither side were really willing to shift. Um, so there was a lot of that, yeah, which very interesting. Yeah, and it's not even that those
Yeah,
things are
definitely.
bad necessarily. Like they just are. It's just a challenge you have to navigate and figure out how to work around.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. I think that's always, yeah, those things are always going to be there. I guess that's why people have their own careers and they have their own aspirations and their own goals because they always have some kind of self-interest in what they're doing, right?
exactly.
I guess otherwise
Yeah,
they wouldn't be on that journey and they wouldn't be doing it.
right,
Um,
right. And
I
I
guess
think when you
certain
have
people are
ambitions.
maybe slightly better at.
Sorry, I was just going to say when you have
Go on.
ambitions, naturally you're quite passionate, and when you're passionate, you want to do things the way you feel passionate about them. So, in a way, it's a good thing. It's just something that you have to navigate.
Yeah, no, you're right. No, you're right. Um, yeah, looking back on places that I've worked as well, I've never really thought about uh, that too much before, but actually, when you do start to think about it, I guess those different self-interests become quite obvious when you actually sit down and start to think about why someone might have done something or focused on a certain area or pushed a certain idea or whatever it might be. Um,
Yeah,
no, no, yeah, completely, yeah, completely get that.
I, I,
Was there
I
anything
think,
else that jumps out to you?
yeah, I think the other big challenge that I didn't know was a challenge at the time, and it's sort of only much later on reflection that I realized it, is just how much my own shortcomings. Whether it's I'm, you know, baggage from childhood, or my strengths and weaknesses, my biases, my prejudices impact my ability to do my job, and do it well. And as I've kind of matured, I guess, and worked on myself and developed some of those skills and capabilities and a little bit more self-awareness, it's really leveled up how well I can do what I do. Um, and when I was young, I just didn't even know that was a thing. Like I didn't know I had the weaknesses, let alone that they were impacting my work. Um, and so that's been, I think, an ongoing challenge, and probably a challenge that I will be grappling with for the rest of my career, I would imagine. Um,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a challenge in itself to have the self-awareness to uh, notice any shortcomings or notice anything that is kind of impacting your day-to-day work, right? Um, it's yeah, I think everyone has it. Not everyone recognizes those certain behaviors, I guess, in themselves and how it's affecting them and that kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
but could you, so obviously you've worked at some pretty cool places so far in your career. Um, could you give us a crash course on what makes a successful director of engineering, CTO, engineering leader?
I could certainly try. Um, I think the first thing to maybe just point out, in case it's not clear, is that director of engineering and CTO can be quite different jobs depending on the organization you're in. It's not always the case. Sometimes they're just different seniorities of the same thing. But a director of engineering, almost always in my experience, is a pure or primarily people leadership job. So it's about people and process. Whereas a CTO can be that, but it can also be a purely technical leadership job of I'm going to define the technical strategy and architecture for our system, and somebody else will deal with the people. Um, so it depends a little bit on what kind of an organization you're in. Um, I'll maybe focus on the people process side of it, since that's the overlap potentially, initially anyway. And within that, what I would say is, in my mind, and I don't know if there's any sort of um, scholastic or academic validity to this, but in my mind, I separate the concept of leadership and management. I think about leadership as if you have a group of people and you're trying to lead them somewhere, right? The leadership part is pointing off into the distance and saying, that's where we want to go, and here's why we want to go there, right? Over there on the horizon is an awesome place we can build our village, right? Because there's water and there's food. Great, let's go. The management part is figuring out how we get from here to there, right? Planning the route, where are we going to stop? How are we going to do the logistics? All that stuff. So in a business sense, I find that leadership is about motivating people, um, describing the purpose or the vision, where are we headed, what's the big grand idea, and why, right? Why are we trying to get there? What is it about that place that's great? Whether it's we want to take Tesla, we want to accelerate the humanity's transition to sustainable energy, right? I think that's something along those lines is what their vision is. And it's pretty easy to like paint that far off distance kind of vision and, excite people about getting there because it's a cool thing, right? There's all these benefits that we're going to get. But then you have to figure out how to get there, right? And that's where, in my mind, management takes over. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to need milestones along the way, and we're going to need some sort of plan, and like we need to organize ourselves somehow. Um, and I think in general, as you start taking kind of senior engineering leadership positions of any kind, the first goal it tends to bias towards management initially and more towards leadership later. So that blend of which of those two things you're doing at any given time transitions from management towards leadership over time or over seniority. Um, I think to some degree you're always doing both. Like it's not like, okay, I don't have to deal with management stuff anymore, or I don't have to think at all about leadership. It's not that, but it's just the bias tends to like I spend more of my time doing leadership things and less doing management stuff the more senior I get. And so for me, kind of when you get to director of engineering and VP, CTO, they tend to be quite more heavily leaning towards leadership stuff, um, at least in my experience. And within that, I think the first thing to say about leadership, which was a fallacy of mine, and I think a lot of people, is that there's this feeling, probably imbued by imposter syndrome, that when I take on a leadership responsibility, I have to have all the answers, right? I have to tell people how it should be. And I think it's good to just dispel that illusion initially because it's not true. Um, you do have to have some idea of where you want to go, I think, because that's kind of what, as I described before, that's kind of the point of leadership is to head yonder, folks. Um, but I don't think you have to know all of the answers. And I think a lot of the pitfalls people fall into when taking on these roles for the first time is that they do try and have all the answers. They tell people how it should be. And I think a different way of thinking about it is your job as a leader is to motivate people and to enable them to do their best work, enable them to find the answers for you, and find people who can help you in getting to the answers. Because a lot of times, not a lot of times, some of the time you will find people who are not interested in that. They don't want to help you get the answers. They want to be told what to do. And that's okay, but they're not the people that you can rely on to solve your problem. Either you need to like put them under management and have the manager tell them what to do, or you just need to find different people. Um, so I think that's really where most of my energy goes when I'm in a leadership position is finding the right people, organizing them in an efficient way, figuring out a way that we can work together and making sure everybody can take part beyond just telling them where I think we need to go. And usually from an engineering point of view, where we need to go is predominantly informed by the rest of the organization anyway, right? Be it executive or product or sales or marketing, they will tell you where they want to go. And it's your job really to just execute that and like give them the tools to get there. Not entirely, but a largish part of the job is that. Um, I think the only other piece that I would kind of throw into the blend is is keeping an eye on the big picture. Because what I've found, and again, this is maybe slightly more lower level than you were asking about, but what I've found is that it's very easy to get tunnel vision, even as a leader. It's like, I've stated this goal, therefore we must do these things, therefore here's the sequence of work. And you can often lose sight of the fact that you might be solving the wrong problem, right? You can get very myopic about making it efficient to solve the problem and forget to step back and double check that we're actually solving the right problem or solving a problem at all, right? There is so much software in the world that doesn't actually solve a problem. And it's easy to see how you get there, right? Like organizations are told to do a certain thing, or parts of organizations or departments or teams, and they go off and build that thing, not realizing that the thing isn't actually needed. Like we could just delete all of that stuff and do it this other way, and then we don't need to write any of that software, and everything's much simpler, right? So, and then like on the technical leadership side, like if you steer more towards the CTO or technical architect or principal engineer or whatever, like that senior technical angle, I think it's more about defining how we build the thing. right? What's the architecture? What technologies are we using? What are our working practices? What's important in software? What's not? And the, there's no right answer there. Like the only observation I would make about that after 25 years of doing this is that CPUs, computers, largely are the same now as they were 25 years ago, right? It's still largely the same instruction set on they've had evolutions, but it's basically the same thing. And yet technology stacks reinvent themselves every 2 to 3 years, right? There's no new framework, a new web thing, a new blah, 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 right? Um, and it's very easy to get lured into the new shiny thing. But especially as a senior engineering leader, it's really important to think about the long-term consequences of that. Of, well, how well supported is this thing? How easy is it going to be for me to find talent that knows about this thing? How supported is this thing, right? How big an ecosystem is there around it? Is it going to go away in the next 5 years? What if, I mean, and you can look back the last 10 years and see all of the like hot new hype things that came along and then died, right? Or even if they didn't die, they just become much less significant. For a while there, I guess in the mid 2000s or something, oh, maybe it was 2010s. Ruby on Rails was the thing. It was going to solve all the problems. It was how you should build applications. Now, relatively few people, comparatively, build on Ruby on Rails, right? So these things come and go,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to get lured into jumping on the new shiny thing and dismissing the old proven thing. And sometimes that's fine, but a lot of the time, it's probably not as big a shift as you think it is.
Nice. I like that. Well, yeah, thank you for talking us through that. I know that's quite a difficult thing probably to give a 25-year career crash course
Yeah,
in a couple of minutes. So, yeah, I appreciate you trying to condense that
yeah. I
for
think
us.
the only other thing to throw in the mix is that there is no one size fits all. Like all of these things need to be tailored to the organization, the domain you're in, the people you have around you, your experiences, your strengths and weaknesses. Like there's no right way to do any of it. And anybody that tells you there is probably lying, um, or soon to be a trillionaire. So I, take it all with a grain of salt. And the biggest thing I have relied on in my career throughout is um, a, a willingness to take ownership and a healthy dose of common sense slash pragmatism. Uh, that's basically the big two tools that I use.
I like that. I like that. I'm going to yeah, I'm going to take that on board myself. Actually, that's a good way of looking at it.
Excellent.
Um, Talking, you mentioned then about going back a couple of seconds to where you were talking about technology and the new shiny thing that comes up. You've been fortunate to work across a number of different industries. Obviously, the blockchain industry being one of them, which, as you
Yep.
know, is close to my heart. So I tend to only help um, Web3 and blockchain projects with recruitment. Um, as someone who has worked in the industry, worked out of it, worked in different spaces, what's something you think people need to be aware of before going into to the Web3 space or to the blockchain industry with this new
Um,
technology, new shiny thing, as you know, you're saying?
yeah, I think, I mean, I sort of alluded to it a little bit already, which is that, right, blockchain, Bitcoin essentially, which was the foundational piece of blockchain as we know it now, was really invented following the 2008 financial collapse, right? It was a bid to say, okay, we need a new way of doing this because the current establishment system is not working.
Mm.
And so by its outset, it was sort of a counterculture thing. It was let's disrupt the existing system completely. Let's break it. Um, And that's probably a really good thing. It's a really healthy thing. But in my experience, it also attracts a lot of people that think that way, right? Naturally, like people that get excited about blockchain are the people that are excited about breaking the existing system for very good reason. And so the blockchain industry has historically, I think, had a lot of those characters in it, and has been shaped by that way of thinking quite a lot. Um, I think it's starting to change now as large organizations get more invested, as sovereign nations get more invested. People are taking it more seriously. Therefore, some of that old way of thinking, as with all countercultures, at some point they just become part of culture, right? It's just what happens. You can't stay counterculture forever. Culture adapts. So that's starting to happen with blockchain, but I think it's still there to a degree, especially in organizations that have been around since earlier on in the process. Um, so that's just something to be aware of, that exists, and it may not be your traditional, corporate structure that you're stepping into. There might be a lot of slightly more anarchic thinking, or I don't know what the right word for it is, but just divergent thinking, just a different way of doing things, which can be good.
Yeah,
Um, I think there's a massive amount of potential still in blockchain. And in a way, we've sort of been distracted by the hype. There's been all the meme coins and the pump and dumps and all that stuff, the NFTs and like all of those crazes that have happened that are sort of a distraction to the real inherent utility of blockchain. And I'm hoping that some of that stuff is now starting to die down and we're getting to the real meat of the space, and trying to solve some real problems. Um, but I think it's still worth being really careful about that hype. So if you're thinking about joining somewhere, if you're looking at, joining a startup, make sure that you're comfortable with what it is they're trying to do and why they're trying to do it. Because I do think there's probably, unfortunately, still quite a lot of that hype-based, you know, money chasing thing going on. Um, but I think there's a potential in blockchain to really disrupt a bunch of industries in really significant and meaningful and positive ways. So I think there's a massive amount of potential.
for sure. I guess you just have to find the projects that are building things for the right reasons, I guess, which is easier
100,
said than done.
yeah,
It takes a lot of
100%.
due diligence, right?
Yeah,
Uh, to work out, if they're building the right sort of thing or if they're on the right type of mission.
yeah,
I guess. Um,
absolutely.
how did you how did you break in to the Web3 space? Is there any kind of story there as to how you got in? Was it a fairly simple applied for a role that you saw online and you got the job? Did you work with a recruiter
Yeah,
to find a role?
yeah.
Because
For me, it
it can be
actually
quite difficult.
was. Yeah, for me, it was actually relatively straightforward because I saw the job advert on LinkedIn. I contacted rather than going through the application process. I just contacted the owner, the kind of the hiring manager directly on LinkedIn, and reached out to them, and he and I got on a quick call, and then I went through the process from there. Um,
Uh,
but yeah, it was just a normal application process for me. But that was partly because I was coming into an organization in a leadership position as they were trying to navigate growth towards maybe a slightly more traditional organizational structure. So it wasn't
yeah.
your traditional kind of or stereotypical startup-y type place where they're maybe after something slightly different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even then, when you said that you reached out to the hiring manager first and you had that conversation prior to you actually jumping into an application, I actually don't think that is then really a normal application because what a lot of people will do is they'll see a job advert online, they'll apply and then wait to see if they get a call or a response from someone, right? Just taking that
Yeah,
initial step of just reaching out to the team directly and just wanting to have a chat about it first. Um, I think that then changes the direction of the application. You really know what you're applying for then. The team know who you are. You've got a much stronger chance of being called through from the interview process, right? Just in that initial outreach. Um, Almost like you were kind of growing your network there first before then applying for something. Not quite, but almost. If you see what I mean. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, maybe
100%.
change the direction a little bit. Um,
Yep.
how would you? Do you have any advice on how you would advise people to break in? I'm guessing you must have hired people there or spoken to people, or been through various different interview processes, been part of hiring processes when you were there. Like, is there any way that you'd advise people to get into the industry, certain way they should go about it, anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some things about blockchain specifically that make it a little bit different. Um, I think that the baseline of anything is be good at what you do, right? So even if you're a graduate or just starting out, don't expect to just walk into a job and have them train you, right? It's your responsibility to hone your craft. Um, and that's true whether you're a software engineer or an actor, for example, or um, any other profession, right? Any other skills-based profession. You have to be good at what you do. Um, so that's kind of the foundational piece. And in blockchain, that means you probably need to go learn how blockchains work, in quite a detailed level. I think there's, especially in the last, I don't know, 15 years or something, since the advent of boot camps and all this stuff, there's been this tendency to pick up the tool and learn the tool and not learn the underlying theory, or be less concerned about the underlying theory. Oh, I know React and JavaScript, therefore now I'm a software engineer and everything's good. I don't really need to understand how a computer works or how memory works or which algorithms are good and which, for what, and data structures and all of that stuff. It's worth knowing some of that stuff, because ultimately your tool is going to fail you somewhere along the way. It's going to have limitations. It's going to have quirks. It's going to have oddities. And when that happens, if you don't have the foundational stuff, you're stuck, and you can't get yourself unstuck. So it's definitely worth either upfront or as you go is also fine, but acquiring some of that more foundational knowledge. Spend the time. It doesn't need to be a college degree. It doesn't need to, university, whatever. You can learn this stuff yourself, but it's worth taking the time to learn it and think about the foundational stuff, not learning the latest and greatest technology. So that applies to blockchain specifically. For example, go read the Bitcoin white paper and see if you can understand the mathematics, right? Like just go do that and follow through all of the logic and how it works and then, how a block is constructed and all that stuff. Even if you don't intend to work in Bitcoin, it will give you the foundational pieces of how a blockchain works because to some degree, they're all sort of the same. I think beyond that, in terms of blockchain specifically, as I said, because of the way it came about, there is still a lot of non-standard thinking out there. So, for example, in traditional organizations, I'm still seeing job adverts that require a university degree, or even worse, require a university degree from a specific university, which is crazy today, right? Like, and there's
Yeah,
much less of that in blockchain. So as long as you have the skill set and you can demonstrate the skill set, you're in with a good shot of being considered for a role. So find ways of demonstrating the skill set, whether it's open source projects or your own GitHub or demo projects you've done or um, work history, obviously, if you've done that. Certainly at Exodus, we scanned GitHub and just looked for people that were interesting. You know, we published job adverts and all that stuff and did that whole thing.
yeah,
But even when we got applications, one of the very first things we would do is go to their GitHub profile and see if there was anything interesting there. Um, it didn't mean that if there wasn't, you would be ruled out, but if there was, you certainly were a stronger contender. So doing that work is good. And because of how blockchain works and its kind of core ethos, there are a lot of open source projects, if not most of them are in some way open source. So you can go out and contribute. Just go learn Solidity or whatever your preferred technology stack is, and start demonstrating that you can do it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
I
Thank
think
you
that's
for
probably
talking us
my
through that.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Because I think yeah, the blockchain industry in general, I think everyone that I know who works in the space does have a much higher baseline in terms of what they know from a technology perspective, actually how things work. So they understand that a blockchain or a block is made of Merkle trees, and that then eventually you get the hash number of the chain, and then how the next hash number works, and then how mining works, and how then the rewards work from that, about like proof of stake or proof of work blockchains and all this kind of stuff, right? Like people understand how all that works and fits together and what that means for the different chains. And a lot of people understand then what limitations that can put on certain chains and others and all this kind of stuff. Um,
Yeah,
so uh, I think you definitely spot on there. You know, having that baseline of knowledge, I think is massively key. I still
yeah.
speak to people who say they want to get into the space, but then I go, all right, cool. Like, can you talk me through some of your on-chain activity? Like, what have you done? What wallets do you use? What chains have you used? And they go, oh no, I haven't played around with any of that because I don't want to chip my own money in. It's like you don't necessarily have to waste any money. It might cost you £5, £10 just to buy a bit of a stable coin and swap it on something for something else and just have a go at moving it between a wallet on blockchain.com and MetaMask or whatever. Just have a play around with the tools. But you'd be surprised how many people try and break into the space without even having used some of those
I,
products or giving
I
it a go
yeah,
at some point.
yeah. I think that's well, two things. I think being a user is always important, regardless of whether it's blockchain or not. And I think a lot of engineers forget to be users, even when they're in the job. Like the number of engineers I've worked with that don't use the product they're working on is almost crazy. Like how can you build the thing if you don't know how it works or what it feels like, right? You just miss so much. The most valuable thing I learned early on was when we were writing software to process Scottish exam results. Uh, that we would go to what's called the SQA, which is the Scottish Qualifications Authority, and watch them typing in the exam results. Like they had like
Okay.
40 people just doing data entry. And you could learn so much just by going and standing there for an hour, watching people type. And we made our software so much better as a result that we never would have thought of doing if we hadn't been witnessing people using it or using it ourselves, right? In anger, not just like, okay, that works. So I'll click the thing 3 times and then, commit and move on. Um, so that's a huge thing. And I think in blockchain that applies equally and it's so accessible by definition almost to everybody, right? It's a public ledger, so you can go inspect the ledger, go do it. Like go use a block explorer and go, follow around. What are transactions? How are they structured? How many are in a block? Like what's the block time on this thing? All that stuff matters and is useful. And then beyond that, as an engineer, I think it's worth digging in even deeper and saying, okay, do I can I at least understand the fundamentals or the concepts behind some of the cryptography that's being used, the elliptical curve stuff, or how do Merkle trees work? Like how would I implement a Merkle tree? Like what does that look like? Um, so digging one level deeper below the definitions of these things to the how. Like how does that actually happen? How do you build a consensus algorithm? Like what does that look like? All of those sorts of things that
Yeah,
come up in blockchain.
definitely. And I think what a lot of people looking to get into the space don't realize is, say if they're an engineer and they haven't necessarily contributed from an engineering standpoint, but they've done the research and they've looked into all of these things and they kind of understand how it works. Is I think a lot of people overlook how strong a personal brand can be just by writing your thoughts on places like Twitter, LinkedIn, Medium, wherever it might be. So if you haven't necessarily built something like this, but you're actually sharing your views on how different updates might affect the space or how you would go about doing a certain thing or, how your thoughts on implementing a certain new technology, whatever it might be. People
Mm-hmm.
underestimate how powerful that can be. You don't have to have actually built something. You can just see, then you can write about it on like a social media, for example. And when hiring managers come across to your LinkedIn, for example, and you've made a ton of posts talking about new Ethereum updates, or how Merkle trees do work and how blockchain works and different consensus mechanisms and this kind of stuff, that at least then someone goes, oh, you know what, like they're clearly passionate, they clearly understand how this
Yeah.
works, or they have the drive to understand how this works in more detail. So you know what, we'll give them a shot, we'll have a conversation. But I think a lot of people overlook that, and overlook that that can be just as powerful sometimes as actually you're building something, you're just showing you understand it. um, so yeah, I think that's pretty important.
For sure. I also think it's been my experience that domain knowledge is actually harder to acquire than technical knowledge, given a base level of technical understanding. So if you have the foundational skills, which is why I mentioned that earlier, whether you're writing in JavaScript or TypeScript or Java or Rust or C, or like, they're not that different. The concepts are all roughly the same. Whereas the amount of knowledge you have to know to work in healthcare versus um, fintech is pretty massive, right? There's just so much nuance there. And I think that's especially true in blockchain as well, right? Where the two sort of overlap of, I need to know the domain knowledge of how blockchain itself works. Like, what is that? And you know, how does a wormhole work? What's a bridge? All of that stuff. What's a smart contract? How does it work? Why is it there? And the domain that blockchain is being applied to, of, okay, this is a blockchain for health records, or this is a blockchain for financial stuff, or this is a blockchain for identity management, or whatever else it might be in future. So you've almost got like three layers of like the technology, the blockchain domain, and then the business domain, all stacked on top of each other. And in a way, the technical piece is the easiest piece to learn. So get that out of the way so that you can focus all of your other time on learning the domain that's going to be the hard part in a way.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's good advice. Really good advice. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Really, is like, as an engineer, how do you ensure that you're able to build a successful career for yourself overall? Like, are there certain key things where you go, you need to be adaptable, flexible, willing to learn, nail those, and you'll have a successful career time and time again? Like, are there any trends that you've seen from engineers that you've hired, for example, that have been successful? Like, could you give us an idea on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I sort of alluded to it earlier, which is the two skills that I rely on is ownership and pragmatism, or ownership and common sense. Um, Now that kind of is built on top of having gone to uni for 4 years and learned a bunch of fundamentals in a fairly theoretical computer science course. So I have some background knowledge of, it's not that I'm like some expert on, well, I'm really not an expert on much of anything, really. Um, I I know a fair amount about
I'm
a
sure
bunch of
that's not true.
stuff. Well, I think it is. I think it is true. I know a reasonable depth of a lot of things, rather than a lot of depth in a few things. So I'm sort of that jack of all trades type person, but I know enough to be able to figure out most things that I need to do and get them done. And I think what has helped me do that is, okay, a base kind of foundational knowledge around how software works, right? Um, what are some of the ways that you can build software? What are some of the pitfalls? What should I look out for? How does testing work? Blah, blah, blah. But really, in terms of added value, it's two things. It's I like taking ownership of things, and I find ways to do that, and it frustrates me when I can't. So, and that started like day one in my graduate job. I walked in and somebody said, "Here's the thing to do," and I just went away and figured out how to do it. Like, it wasn't, okay, now let me go ask advice on this next bit, and so on. Like, I just figured out how to do it because I wanted to own that problem and give them a solution. Um, a recent co-founder friend of mine that I've worked with for a few years, in the recent history. It said I don't hire people to give me more problems, right? I hire people to solve them. So be the person that solves the problem, not the person that creates them. And I think that's a general skill at any level, in any organization, in any domain, in any competency that carries you a long way. Um, in fact, I've heard
Mm.
Barack Obama talk about exactly the same things. The people he looks for are the people who are willing to go solve a problem. So it works like at every level, all the way up to President of the United States. So I think that's a really key one, is figure out what it looks like to
Yeah.
take ownership. And the reciprocal part of that is know when you have to ask for help. Like there's no point spinning your wheels for weeks on end trying to solve a thing you don't know how to solve and you can't figure it out. It's fine to ask for help. It's just when you go ask for help, make sure you've done all of the other things so that they're not telling you obvious things. And similarly, if you find a problem, raise the problem because somebody needs to know. And even if you don't solve it, somebody needs to solve it. And what I tend to do is try and come up with a straw man solution. Here's the problem, and here's maybe a potential solution because worst case, they'll say, thanks very much. Best case, in a way, they'll say, great, go do it, right? Which just levels you up immediately. So I think that ownership
Mm.
thing is huge, and being a problem solver is huge. I think the only other thing I would say is, and this sort of gets into philosophical territory, but it came from the acting world, which is maybe a good place to touch on this stuff, is I realized when you're acting, you're uncomfortable a lot of the time, right? You're being asked to go to uncomfortable places emotionally, psychologically, um, technically too, but those former two in the most part. And so I experienced an awful lot of imposter syndrome of, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. And if you listen to interviews with actors, almost at any level, they will say the same thing, right? Highly acclaimed Oscar winners will show up on set feeling like they don't know what they're doing and they're going to get found out, right? And for me, a huge unlock was realizing that from an evolutionary point of view, the experience of fear was designed to protect us from danger, right? Ooh, there's a lion out there. I better run away. However, in the modern world, there are very few things that you actually need to be afraid of compared to the number of things that you are afraid of. And your brain can't tell the difference. So, in terms of probabilities, today, fear is probably a signpost towards something you should do because almost anything worth doing is on the other side of fear. The biggest rewards are almost always on the other side of something that's uncomfortable. And so if you can recognize the fear, the imposter syndrome, the I don't belong, and head towards it, you're probably heading in the right direction. And so when you experience imposter syndrome, just recognize that it's okay. It's probably a good place to be. And it's totally fine to fake it till you make it. It's absolutely almost required because you can't step into something new without that. You just have to make sure that you then learn the make it part, right? Fake it until you learn the skills, but do the learning. Spend the time, read the books, whatever you have to do to get the experience and the knowledge and the skills to be able to perform. And until then, just fake it. It's fine. Everybody else is.
Yeah.
But that unlock of thinking that imposter syndrome, oh, this is uncomfortable. I shouldn't be here. I'm out of my depth is a good place to be. And if you can get comfortable with the uncomfortable of accepting that state of being as a good thing, it will it will pay you dividends no end.
For sure. I really like that advice. I think that's great. Um, isn't it something, isn't there a quote that says something like being comfortable is the killer of dreams? Something like that. I can't remember who said that, but that's a quote that I've heard,
Yeah, I
um,
don't know, but it sounds right.
which I think is quite, yeah, which I thought is quite powerful. Um, and I like what you were saying about about being a problem solver and coming with a solution. Because I think that also leads into what you said at the start of the conversation about how when people step into the leadership role for the first time, they have to come with all the answers, right? When actually
Hmm.
you want to build a team of people around you that will go away, or say if they have a problem, they come to you and go, look, this is the problem, this is what I plan to do, and you just go, yeah, cool, I trust you, do it.
Right.
Um, so I think that all kind of leads in really, and kind of leads back to what you were saying before. I mean, it reminds me when I first stepped into management for the first time, actually. And when I first started, I was trying to solve everything for everyone. I was saying, they'd say, oh, like this is happened. I was like, okay, well, what you want to do is this, 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 and this. And then I was doing that for ages. And then it got to the point where people would rely on you for the solution. They wouldn't think for themselves, particularly. And then over time, I switched it so that actually within the team, it was just a running joke that they'd go, oh, when you go to Jack, you know exactly what he's going to say. And it would just be, well, what would you do about this? And then over time, that then turned into them joking about me knowing what I was going to say. And then that then turned into them going, oh, by the way, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. Are you happy with that? And it's just like, yeah, you just create those problem solvers, those proactive people, right? Um, so yeah, what you're saying, yeah, I completely resonate with what you're saying. I think it's really good advice. But
Good. Yeah.
But how do you think? Because you obviously were working in tech, then left, work on your acting for 6 years. Did you say?
Something like
And
that.
then
Yeah.
you then came back into tech.
Yeah.
Um, how do you think that that changed you? Like coming back into tech after doing that, did you approach things differently? Was like a different thought about things? Like, did you approach things in a different way? Like, how did that impact?
Yeah. So I think what the acting did is it massively leveled up my emotional intelligence, um, and my people skills. I mean, if you think about what acting is, really, is you're a professional empath to a degree, right? That's what acting is. I mean, we could get into the nuance of it, but really, what you're doing is you're enabling other people to share an emotion with you. Um, People go to the movies, right, to cry in the dark because it's okay there, where it's not okay in the rest of society, and not exclusively, of course. They go to laugh and um,
Yeah.
be afraid and whatever else. But it's a place where you can experience emotions that you wouldn't otherwise get to. And so the the counter side of that is that the actor has to be comfortable in all of those places because they have to take you there. So I learned
Mm.
how to make myself, I'm not going to say comfortable because it's never comfortable. My acting teacher used to say it it never gets easy. It just becomes more possible. So I can now be uncomfortable, emotionally speaking. And I have a greater capacity for empathy and compassion, for sure. I'm more connected to people. I know how to connect to people. Um, and so that from a leadership point of view, especially when you're kind of the servant leader mindset as I am, of my job is to clear the way so that everybody else can do their best work and kind of cheer them on. Um, it's hugely important. I can now, I'm much more able to build rapport with people. I can build trust. I can help them in ways that I wasn't previously able to help them in some of the difficult things that get in the way of work. Of, you never know if somebody's going through a bereavement or is having a really hard time financially, or, those are often the things that really decimate somebody's capability to work, and quite rightly. And so if I can be there and even take a portion of that off their hands or help them a little bit, it has a pretty massive impact on their ability to do work. It has an even bigger impact on them as a human, which maybe is more important. But in terms of my role and my job as within the context of an organization, it helps them stay on target a little bit better and helps me insulate the rest of the team from some of the disruption, which is huge, right? So I think it's in that area where the acting thing really helped me is building better interpersonal relationships, building a better network, building a stronger relationship with other departments so that I can kind of lean on them a little bit when times are tough, kind of bypass some of the bureaucracy or, lines of communication that are formal. Um, and and also kind of get a better read on how people are, meaning like how are they doing today? What's on their, because the other part of acting is they say acting is reacting. What it really is reading other people. Um, and so I just developed a bunch of those skills that have been tremendously useful.
Yeah, for sure. Especially when you're building teams and growing teams and looking after people, especially if you're in a senior position and a large percentage of your role is leadership and management. Um, yeah, I can imagine that's hugely useful. Um,
It is. I mean, it's also, I mean, you say leadership, and it's definitely true that it's even more useful there. But even at the most junior level, if you're coming in as a new grad or something, even there, unless you're going to be working in isolation, you're part of a team. So having interpersonal skills of being able to relate to your teammates, being able to relate to your manager, being able to, express in a, in a conscientious and caring way what your opinions are. I mean, those are all tremendous skills. I mean, communication skills. Every job advert pretty much ever has strong communication skills on it, right? Like it's the last bullet point in the skills list on every job posting ever. So that's what they mean: is can you relate to people? Can you talk to people? Can you explain yourself? Can you not step on toes? Can you not aggravate people? That's the basics of it.
yeah, for sure. It's the emotional intelligence, isn't it? I think when people say they want good communication skills, I think a lot of it is probably we just want emotional intelligence
Yes. Yeah.
half the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, do you whilst we're on the subject of job adverts and skills and that kind of thing, like do you have any advice, like say if someone is looking to grow a team and hire into their teams for the first time, for example? I'm sure you must have interviewed tons of people over your career. How does someone as a first time manager go about finding the right sort of talent for their team?
So, um, I mean, there's the process of like acquiring the leads, which is one piece of it, right? Of how are you actually going to get people in front of you to talk to?
Mm,
And I think for me, um, referrals are obviously the highest success rate in my experience, just because you know good people and good people know good people, right? So um, that generally tends to be the top hit rate for me. Finding a good recruiting partner is a huge piece, right? Somebody that you trust, that shares your values, that understands what you want, that you kind of speak the same language, because hiring is tremendously time consuming. It, you know, if you're actively hiring for one, two, three roles, you can end up spending an awful lot of your time just screening people if you don't have a recruiting
yeah,
partner, right? So you want somebody that you can trust to do that stuff so that when they get to you, you can actually have meaningful conversations rather than, you know, throwing out people essentially that just aren't right for whatever reason. Um, in terms of the actual recruitment process, um, I have a somewhat non-standard approach, I think, in the sense that I don't really buy into interviews, really, in the sense of being able to vet through a sequence of conversations whether somebody will be good for the job or not.
mm,
The hit rate just isn't that great, right? You can get a really good sense in a conversation of how you relate to a person, right? How do they come across? Do they seem genuine? Do they talk well? Do they seem to know what they're talking about? And that's really important. I think that's very valuable to do. And I think it's probably worth doing some sort of technical interview where you try and dig in a little bit deeper on whether they actually know the technical fundamentals of what they're talking about. Like, and in that sense, for me, it doesn't really make much sense to do leet code stuff or take home exercises or any of that stuff because it's so easy to get the wrong idea or to bypass, right? If you do a take home test, well, now AI will just write it for you, blah, 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 whatever. Or they can spend way longer than you intended for them to. So what you thought would take 6 hours, they can spend 46 hours doing and pretend it was 6 hours, right? And you wouldn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Um, and leet code, it's so specific and narrow in application, and people train for it now, so they just go to some site and practice these things for hours on end, and yeah, they're going to learn it, right? What is From a technical point of view, what I like to do is I like to just take people through a problem. Like we'll just talk through something at a relatively high level, and then I can just start digging in. Um, Something specific to your domain is best, whether it's some API that you need, or it could even be something that you're trying to build right now. Just get their take on it, and you get free work essentially. Um, and just like dig in here and there. To do that, though, you have to be technical. Like if you're not technical, you can't really do that. Um, in which case, you ask somebody else on your team to do it, or not. The the best tool, if you can get it, is I do interpersonal, just kind of soft skills interviews. Basically, I ask things like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What motivates you to go to work every day? What kind of people do you like working with? Just get a sense of who they are, what they like, what are your hobbies, type conversation. Try to, obviously, just the basic interviewee things of ask open questions, not closed questions. Have an idea of what questions you might want to touch on, but don't hold to it. Just have a good conversation. Um, when you get to like evaluating, are they really actually a good fit for the business? What I find works best is give them a trial. Just say, hey, come and work for us for 4 weeks and we'll pay you, right? Um, and or 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it is, and have like some fringe project that they can work on where if it doesn't go well, it doesn't ruin your day. But it gives you something meaningful, to assess them on. And I've found that it works quite well if you can do it part time, because then they don't need to give up their day job to do it. If that works for your environment, if you're remote working and async, then works great. 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever they can manage. Pay them accordingly, pay them a reasonable amount. Doesn't need to be a full salary, but something that makes it worth their while. And just see how it goes. And you'll learn so much more from doing that than you will from, 2, 3 hour interviews or whatever horrendous thing that people, put candidates through. Uh, you'll work, how do they work with the team? How do they communicate? What's their code hygiene? How do they structure problems? How do they think through stuff? How do they communicate about problems? How do they come with the solution as well as the problem? All of that stuff that we just talked about, you learn in a couple of weeks. Um,
Mm.
yeah, that's my advice. Whether that works for, various organizations have hiring policies, and this is the process we do, and if that's the case, do your best. Um, I would just go back to the two things, which is fundamentals are probably more important than specifics. Domain knowledge probably matters more than specific technical skills. And I would put on top of that somebody who seems smart and can think and communicate clearly probably can figure out most of the stuff that you need them to do. Um,
Yeah,
so focus on
yeah,
that.
that's fair enough. No, I think that's good advice. I mean, I saw today actually advice from someone. It was either LinkedIn or Twitter that said um, rather than doing really long like take home technical tests similar to what you said, like see if there is a way that you can employ that person for a couple of weeks and give them a contract to work on and test them out. Echoing obviously they're echoing exactly what you said there, um,
Mhm.
which I think uh, is a good way to do it. I think you kind of have to shortlist down. You don't have side projects for everyone. I'm sure there's a lot of companies out there that can't pay 10 people to do 10 different side projects to see like who they want to work with. So I guess you have to get to some sort of shortlist of maybe one or two people that you really
Right.
like the look of in order to do that. Um, but there's a bunch of things there that you were talking about where they have to have the right mindset, the right attitude. Are they a problem solver? Did they know the fundamentals and that kind of thing? So there must be uh, a place for a fairly structured interview in there to make sure you can tick all those boxes or cross them if
100%.
they don't fit. Um, but no, I like that approach. I think a lot of companies are super rigid in their interview processes, which can work honestly, but then sometimes kind of hinder processes as well. I think there's a place for both, depending on the role maybe that you're looking for. If something is a little bit more kind of black and white, have you delivered it, have you not? Um, but no, I like your advice. I think that's quite nice. I think it's a nice way to interview. I think it makes for quite a nice candidate experience throughout an interview process as well, which for me is key. Leaving a good impression on candidates in the market. I think having that real open conversation with them would definitely leave them with a nice experience, personalized experience as well throughout that. So I think that builds a good employer brand in the market throughout that process as well. Um, no, that's cool. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah, I think that last piece you said is really important in that I always try and view an interview as a two-way street, right? They're interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing them. And it should be like that's how I want to work too. Like I'm not the guy that wants to tell everybody exactly how to do their job, and it's just not interesting to me. So I want people to bring themselves to the job, and that starts at the interview, I think.
yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Um, Will, you shared a lot of advice today, and obviously talked us through your journey in quite a lot of detail. There's one question I always like to ask everyone before we finish up. Um, if you could go back 25 years, I think you said,
Yeah.
to the start of your career, knowing what you know now about technology, leadership, um, what advice would you have for your younger self just starting out?
I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of it, but the big thing probably is to embrace imposter syndrome of, you know,
Okay.
essentially don't be afraid to be afraid. Um, and trust trust your instincts. Um, I spent a lot of time early on, as many engineers do, obsessing about, what's the best technology, what's the right language, what's the new fangled architecture that we should be using? Is that better? Am I going to get stuck? Like it doesn't. None of it really matters to a degree, right? You can write good software in almost any technology, just about. People have been writing in C, which now is considered kind of antiquated and whatever, for 50 years, and they're still doing it, right? And built huge systems. It doesn't really matter. It's all the same as ones and zeros. So um, you can write good software no matter what. It doesn't have to be optimal. It has to be good, and or good enough maybe. And I think the other thing is don't take your eye off of the real world problem you're solving. I spent a lot of time getting really obsessed about the most optimal way to solve this technical problem that I was trying to solve, and losing sight of the real world problem I was trying to solve in the first place, which probably didn't need anywhere close to that much engineering. It was just I could have done a much simpler solution that probably would have been just as good as far as the end user is concerned, and it wouldn't have mattered. So make sure you understand the real world problem you're solving, because ultimately that's the job of a software engineer. It's not really to write software, it's to solve real world problems using software. So don't lose sight of that, I think would be some advice. I could have saved myself a whole bunch of time and energy building the wrong thing.
That's good advice. Well, Will, thank you very much for sharing all your advice today, and yeah, coming on the show and talking us through your journey. Appreciate you taking the time. Um, if anyone has any questions, they want to reach out, or just want to find out a bit more about you, I guess in LinkedIn is probably the best place to do that.
Yep, probably. Yep, you can find me there, William J. Beaumont. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Well, yeah, thank you very much again. It was great having you on, and yeah, really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for having me. Been great.